Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend some time looking at how Read and Write can support your ELA. Well, I'm based out of Boston, so I'm used to saying ELL. But yeah, EAL learners. And I'm really excited to be here. In my previous life, was a teacher myself. I taught 4th and 5th grade for just over 10 years. And I worked with a variety, like a very varied population, I would say. So when I look at Read and Write, I really wish that I did have this tool to help me support students that were coming here. English was not their first language. So I'm hoping that you walk away with a lot from our session today. So I know that Whiteley does a lot of work making sure everybody knows what Read and Write is. So I'm hopeful that everybody here does know that it is a literacy support tool. We refer to it as like the Swiss Army knife of tools for EdTech because there's a tool for everything. But for our session today, we're really going to look at it through the lens of EAL and how to support those learners specifically. So we will take a look at a variety of reading tools, writing tools, and study skills, organization, and research. When it comes to EAL, we know that there's a pretty typical progression of how they're acquiring language. Of course, it starts with listening. They're listening to the words, and then we move on to trying to promote speaking based on what they have heard. And then when everything comes together, that allows for reading and writing. So we're going to take a look at the different tools that can help them when they're listening or speaking, and then, of course, paving the way for reading and writing. So I am going to switch over to a tab. So Read and Write behaves very similarly on the web and in a doc and in slides. There are just a few minor differences that we can go over, but I am going to just pull up this website as a jumping off point. So I have my purple puzzle piece up in my browser, so I am going to activate that so that it shows up here. When you are using Read and Write on the web with your learners, I just want to point out that it is completely draggable. You can reposition it wherever works for you or wherever works for them. But before we get started, I do want to just go over some settings that will be especially pertinent for the population that you are working with. So if you go to the 3 dots at the end and click Settings, the first thing I want to go over is speech. So this is when you're having things read aloud to your students. So speech, text to speech. So first things first is underneath voice. There's upwards of like 100 different voices that your students can pick from. And this is really kind of contingent upon which language they may be using for our translate button. They may want to use a voice that has a more familiar intonation or dialect or tone to it. So they can pick from a bunch here. They can also change the speed. So your learners may want it a little more slowed down to help them with tracking and just understanding and processing. So you can drag this down to lower the speed of the rate that it's being read aloud. And of course, you could speed it up too, but that's not likely going to help your students. So 50 is just a pretty basic normal pace as well. So you could leave it at that. I always recommend having continuous reading checked off because when you activate text to speech, this is going to allow for it to continue to be read aloud to your students until they prompt it with a pause or stop button to stop. This is just helpful, especially for your students if they're trying to track and really follow. It just allows them to keep going instead of having to constantly prompt it to start reading again. Right here, so translation, this is, of course, really important as you want your students to try to start making connections between the English word and the word that they recognize in their native language. So if you go here There, I think, is over 90 languages now to pick from. And this is just going to translate words in isolation. So this will translate a word at a time, not an entire page. I can show you how to do that. That's built in right through Google, but we can go over how to do that for your students. It's not like a read and write thing. It's a Google thing. The reason that we translate words in isolation, one at a time, we know that it could be one language like French, but there could be several words that mean that same thing. It depends on sort of the dialect, where you're from, right? So that's why we translate words in isolation. If we were to just translate an entire article, we would have to pick like one word for that word, right? So that's why we translate words in isolation. We can definitely go over the built-in Google feature to help you out with that. And then one other thing that is worth pointing out while we are here is language. If you click this is far more, I like to use the word kind of like intense. It's more involved. It's changing the entire localization of this software. So this software will behave in the language you are picking. So there's far fewer options because this takes a lot of work on the back end. We are basically rewriting the entire software to function in these languages. So you will notice that the list is very short, but perhaps you will see the language of a student that you are working with. So you could change literally like the read and write software itself. So I can show you that really quick. So for language, if you wanted to change basically the language that the buttons are presented in, you would hit Spanish, let's say. I know that I worked with a very large Spanish population when I was in the classroom. So this would have really helped them because now all of the buttons are in Spanish. And then for the functions underneath, this means that you are changing basically how the buttons themselves work. So like the dictionary would pull up in the language that you choose, et cetera, et cetera. So I could also change that. And now if I were to open up the dictionary, it would be in Spanish. So if you do see a language of a student that you're working with, this could really change like their entire user experience of read and write down to like the names of the buttons. So just wanted to put that out there as well. But now we'll actually look at things as they work here. So we did on that sort of scale, those steps of language acquisition, we started with listening. So first things first is how to have a text read aloud. So there are several options to do this. The first of which, if you are on the web, would be hover speech. And if you ever aren't sure what a button is or what it does, if you just hover over it for like 2 seconds, it's going to let you know. But hover speech, your students can just click that and they can hover wherever they want to have it read aloud. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to click hover speech and hover right here.
Dr. Sami Youssef, a senior researcher at the Kaunas University of Technology.
So it will read aloud to them. And I know, again, from being in the classroom with my ELL students, they often needed a one-to-one to sort of read to them and discuss text. So this takes out that middleman. And what it is doing, which really could help your students, is it's doing that dual color highlighting. So it's helping them to track and make connections between the word they're seeing and what they're hearing read aloud. So if I didn't hit pause, since I have continuous reading switched on, it would have went to the next sentence and the next sentence.
Large plastic items can be.
And since I'm still in hover speech, it's going to kind of keep hovering and reading. So that is a great way for them to start making connections between written text and hearing the words verbally. Another way to have things read aloud to your students is the double click trick. So they could kind of go anywhere within an article, and if they double click on a word, it will highlight the word in its entirety. To have a student use a cursor to highlight a word, they might not highlight all the letters, or they might highlight an extra letter from another word. So if you just teach them to double click and do that trick, it will highlight the word for them. And then they can just hit play.
Whereas large plastic items can be sorted out and recycled relatively.
And it behaves basically the same way as hover speech. Hover speech is not an option on like a Google Doc or a Google Slide, so you would just do that double click trick to have it read aloud. And then there is one more way to have things read aloud to your students, and that is when they encounter an infographic where they cannot highlight with their cursor. So there's no way for them to sort of activate it. And that would be with our screenshot reader. So if you do have your students, you're trying to get them into nonfiction, you can have this box here. So you would hit screenshot reader, draw a box around any words that you want them to be able to access. It's going to work its magic. So that's another way to have it read aloud. All of these tools, of course, are helping them with their listening skills and starting to make connections. Of course, this would be sort of a more advanced skill down the road, but I do just want to point out that if you have these students organizing information, researching, the last button here is actually a copy button, because otherwise this text is inaccessible. You can't copy and paste it, right? So you would hit this copy button here, and then they can pull the text from the infographic that they were looking at. So any questions about any of the ways that we can help your students listen? All right. So next thing is a trifecta of tools that, again, are really going to help your students start to make meaning of what these words in English are. So I actually still have some highlights left from my last demo. Okay, cool. So if we take a look here at the word scientist, let's say that your students are not familiar with that word in English. There are 3 tools that they can have open in tandem to start to make meaning. So I'm going to use that double click trick again to grab the word scientist. And the first tool that they can have open is the dictionary. So the dictionary is going to pull out that word so they can hear it read.
Scientists.
And then it's also going to pull out several definitions. Again, depending on where your students are at with their language acquisition, this may be sort of a lot of information, but again, it won't hurt for them to hear it. So it will give them several options for what the definition is. They can hit play again to hear it read aloud.
Noun. A person with advanced knowledge of one or more sciences.
And again, this is very word-based, so I do want to just point out that right next door is our picture dictionary. So your students can prompt that open, and now they are also going to have a visual and a graphic to pair with what they just either read or heard read aloud. So this is really, really powerful. I remember in my classroom, I used to have a picture to go with every single word that I was labeling and providing to students. So having that open is really invaluable. And then, of course, the translate button. So they can have this open again at the exact same time. So my translator language was French, so that is what it is pulling up. So again, your students could hear it in English.
Scientists.
And then hear it in the language they're more familiar with.
Scientifique. Savant.
And again, having all of that open at the same time can really help your students start to make meaning. So any questions about any of those word clarification tools? Okay, awesome. So I do just want to point out, going off of this, that yes, we are just translating words in isolation because there could be more than one. But let me show you a little quick trick. So if you right click on a web page, You will, can you see that? I guess you can't, huh? Bummer. All right, well, if everybody's with me, if you right click on a web page, just pull up like any web page at all. I didn't realize you wouldn't see that browser window, but if you right click it on any web page at all, you're going to see like reload, save, print, like all these options, but then you are going to see translate to English. So in that case, it's going to be like, I already detect English. Is that really what you want to be translating to? Then you'll see there's like 3 dots that say choose another language. And I am able to translate this web page into any language I want. So I just translated it into French using that sort of workflow. I have this doc here. So let's say you can actually do this in 2 different ways. If you wanted to translate a doc that you have in English to their language, this would be an option. Or if you let your students type, cool. If you let your students type in their native language and then you want to translate it, of course, you could just copy and paste into Google Translate, but this is just a quicker workflow. So if you go to Tools, right on your doc, again, this is in a read and write tool. Can you see that? Well, right under Tools, there is the Translate Document option. So if you just kind of click into Tools and scroll down to Translate Document, it's sort of like the same thing. You would just choose the language that you want to translate into. So I know Wanda Lee pointed out Ukrainian. You can hit translate. It is going to open up a new tab just because it doesn't want to like mess with your original one, but there you go. Now it is in Ukrainian. Yeah, I know. It is really neat. So yeah, and then of course, like I said, if your students typed like this, you could just vice versa it. So you could then read what they wrote. So yeah, that's a really neat trick just because like I said, we just isolate words to translate. So yeah, awesome. I'm glad that that was new information and that was helpful. So I'm going to go back to this website. So we did look at how students could kind of like be translating words on the fly as they're reading. But again, from being in the classroom, I know that like for my ELL students, I would have to make like flashcards almost, where it would be like the word, the picture, and then like a way for them to make meaning. So there is a tool built right into the read and write toolbar. It's called the vocab list. I think that this will really be all of your best friends. Of course, you could have your students making these, but if you are trying to help them build background knowledge and engage with texts and even just like things around your classroom and stuff, like this is the sink, this is how you say bathroom, that's a lot of work for you. So this is kind of a little hack to get what you need into a doc that could be printed or shared or hung up or what have you. So I am going to just choose a few words within this article. So we do have to use the highlighters that are built into the toolbar to activate the vocab list, but we still can use our double click trick just to like get the word and then we would highlight it. So I'm just going to pick scientist. I'll pick a few. Pollution. So like you could totally do this on a Google Doc where like you've typed the words that you know you're going to need. You could use like the highlighter tool to highlight the words and follow this exact same workflow. I'm just doing this on the site because that's where I am. But yeah, this same workflow will work on a Google Doc where you're just like, I need these 10 words on a vocab list. So I just highlighted these 4 words. I just used yellow, the classic highlighter color, but it's kind of arbitrary. You can choose whatever color you need. You could switch up the colors. And I'm going to come over to this list here that says vocab list. So when I click that, it's asking me what colors I'd like to collect. And since I just used yellow, I'm just going to collect yellow, right? So I'm going to hit OK. And it's letting me know that it's creating my vocab list for me. What it is going to do is Oh, there it is. So this just pulled up a completely new doc. I did not do anything. It immediately embedded a new doc right into my Google Drive for me, which is really nice. And what it did is it pulled out the word. It pulled out like legit every single dictionary definition that it could access. And then it also pulled out the widgets, the symbols that are associated with those words. So this, of course, depending again where your students are within their language acquisition, would probably have to be simplified a lot, but it's just like a really nice jumping off point. So this is completely editable. So if this is a lot of language, so you'd probably want to streamline that a bit more. You might even just want to like pick one picture that you think shows the meaning the best. But then you could even like resize the writing. So if you wanted this to be something that your students could refer to and make meaning, this notes column you could change to like their native language, right? Like you could say in French, this is the word. You, again, depending on where they are in their language acquisition, you might want them to draw a picture or make a connection or make meaning, but this is completely editable and customizable to what you and your students need. So this could be something, again, that you are printing off and providing them ahead of time. You could always get rid of this column altogether if you don't need it. But if you wanted to say, like in French, it is this word, and provide that support and make meaning and connections, that's an option. And also, if you do need more room, again, this is not a read and write specific hack. It's just right in Google Docs. You could go to Format and click Page Orientation. And right now it's in Portrait, like your classic printed page. But if you just went to Landscape, you get a lot more room. So again, depending on how many columns or space you want, or even if you just want to make this really big or print it and cut it out as a card for reference, that's there for you to work with. So just wanted to point that out. So any questions about the vocab list? And students could totally build their own. I know I keep talking about it from like your perspective, just because I think this is super powerful for you working with EAL, but they could build their own as well. Like as they're encountering words they don't know that they want to learn, they could follow that same workflow. So any questions about that? All right. So I think that one more thing that I should point out in relation to the picture dictionary, again, thinking of your workflow, is if you are in a Google Doc, and let's say you wanted to teach them, you know, bathroom and sort of like a symbol for that so they understand. If you were to just highlight bathroom and come to the picture dictionary, there's going to be several like widgets that pop up that are like really kid friendly to look at and understand. If you ever want to pull something from the picture dictionary, you can. It literally would just be like a drag and drop. Right. So if you ever need like a quick printout, you're like, I need to print and label this. You can just type it and highlight and look at what the picture dictionary has for you. So just a little teacher hack to throw in there. So we have looked at how to get things read and how to clarify word meaning. We're going to look at one more application of those highlighters. There are a lot of ways that you could use the highlighters. So I'm going to go back to this website here. So since I already did some work on this website, I do have several things highlighted. So I'm just going to use my cursor to drag over them. Cursor is not behaving. Okay, and then I would use the sweep there, and that's going to clear my highlights. So again, just a little teacher hack there. So with the highlighters, you are able to collect them outside of just making a vocab list. several ways to think about this. I am going to send Wandalee and Julia a lot of resources to share out with you all, some inspo for how to use these different tools with the population you're working with. But just at like the most basic sort of application of this, of course, let's say that you are trying to teach your students parts of speech or words that begin with S or T or like SH sounds, you know, like all those foundational sort of things that come with learning a language. I'm going to go the route of like nouns, verbs, adjectives for the sake of this. But let's say that you are trying to get them to understand parts of speech and the difference. Again, this is a more advanced skill down the road after. Yes, perfect. Yep. So if I, and of course, this does take some work on your part to let them know, like a noun, you're going to highlight in yellow, a verb, you're going to highlight in green. I definitely would be assigning colors to your students just to give them a nudge in the right direction. So if you did say, that you are going to highlight all the nouns in yellow, let's say, you could use the double click trick, get the yellow. I'm just going to highlight a few random things here. You could even get into proper nouns if you want. That would be a whole nother thing there. So I just highlighted a few nouns. Let's see, I'll do a few verbs. Classified, sorted, recycled. Okay, so just to sort of show you, so I just used those two colors, right? I delineated what they meant. I went through and I highlighted. So now I could go to collect highlights, which is right next to the sweep and right next to the vocab list. I can hit collect highlights. And again, if you wanted to do this ahead of time to be like, these are nouns, these are verbs, these are adjectives, this is also a quick way to sort of gather all that information. So you could hit collect highlights. And you are going to have two options pop up. So you can sort highlights by color, which is what I am going to want to do. I'm going to want all of my nouns together and all of my verbs together. Sorting by position is more so like if you had your students highlighting, let's say like cause and effect in two different colors, but you wanted, and those are typically close together, like in a sentence or paragraph, and you wanted them close to each other when they grab them so they could be like, this is the cause and its associated effect. You might tell your students to sort the highlights by position so that they stay somewhat together. But since we're categorizing, we do want to sort highlights by color to keep them separate. And then for this, since I only used yellow and green, I'm just going to check those off. And then I'm going to hit OK. So just like with the vocab list, it's letting me know that it is collecting my highlights. And again, a very similar workflow to the vocab list is that it pulled them into a Google Doc that now lives in my Google Drive. So you can see that it has separated them out. I didn't do a great job highlighting scientists, I guess. But yeah, so now your students could quickly be like, hey, Mrs. Whiteley, these are my verbs. And these are my nouns. How did I do, right? So they can start to pull that information out and present it to you. If they wanted to get rid of the highlight, not a problem. They could just use their cursor to go over it. They can actually use the highlighter built right into a Google Doc to get rid of it. They could just hit none. And then this is just a really quick way for them to gather all of their thoughts into an organized doc. And this isn't necessarily a research activity. A lot of times collect highlighters are used for research, but that is like a very advanced understanding of the language they're working in, right? But if this was a research doc that's pulling all information, it does also give a link back to the original source so we can help them with not plagiarizing and citing and such. So any questions about this? Okay, awesome. So I'm going to go back to that site that we've been on to go over, again, a feature I think that you're going to be a really big fan of. I think that as a teacher ahead of time, let's say you're trying to get some nonfiction out to your learners, there's a lot of distractions here. There's ads, there's links to other articles, there's pictures, there's a comment section. So even though this article may be great for acquiring some new academic language and content-specific language, it's really busy. So if that is the case, if you ever run into a text that you would like your students to work with, but it's just a lot, even for some students, this would be like cognitive overload, like it's just too much. You can use this simplify button down here. It's at the very end of your toolbar. And when you click it, it does take, like a solid 30 or so seconds, and it really depends on how busy the original article was. I choose an extremely busy one just to show you how great Simplify is. So what it is doing right now, basically, as it's working its magic, is it's identifying all of those distractions, those extraneous hyperlinks, the comment box, pictures that don't actually add to the content. That was actually pretty fast. Good job, Simplify. So what it did is it got rid of sort of all of the distractions. And what it did is it pulled out basically what its algorithm identified as the most important information and the most important graphics. This is not a text leveler. I just want to make that clear distinction. So this is not simplifying the language. It's not like taking out words and putting easier words to understand in. It's just like whittling down to the most important information while still maintaining the rigor of the text. So if we take a look here, this is its first go at simplifying. Still a lot of writing, it's still a lot of pictures. So if you come up here next to simplify and you hit the subtraction sign, this is going to start narrowing it down more. And the more you hit the subtraction sign, the more it's going to simplify. It does kind of like tap out at one point. It's like, I can't simplify anymore. There's going to be nothing here. So this is sort of like the most basic representation of the article that you started with. And if you find that this isn't quite where you were hoping for, you could always undo it by just hitting the plus sign. So ahead of time, if you had this really busy text on a web page and you wanted to really narrow it down for your learners, you could open up Simplify and then just pull the text and print it. If you had a student who could kind of do this on their own, they are more than welcome to simplify it down as well. Another feature, if this is in the student's hands, is this Discover feature. This is really awesome. So what it does is right within the article, it is picking out words that students may need clarification on. And if I kind of went back to the busier version of it, it will do that as well. So I'm going to come back here. So depending on how many words there are, it might take a little longer, just because like this article is a lot longer. Let me try that again. But yeah, so what it will do is it's going to underline words that your students may not know. And this is different from the dictionary that also exists here, because this is picking out proper nouns as well. This is actually pulling information from Wiki. No links back to Wikipedia or anything. Your students won't end up on there. But that's why the information is just a little more detailed. So if your students came to Lithuania and didn't know what that was, it's now going to give them a picture of the flag and let them know where Lithuania is and what it is. So pretty cool. And they can, of course, use their text-to-speech to help them out once they're in this window. So that will build right in for your students if they are themselves using the Discover button. If we go back to you as a teacher, working with this ahead of time, so you can share it out or print it out. A few other options here. You can change the contrast. We know that this contrast helps with eye fatigue. Different contrasts are supposed to help students with dyslexia. So it's totally up to you, sort of which makeover you want to give to it. You can also change the font when you're over and simplify. So if you wanted to make it bigger for your students, if you wanted to change the actual font itself, we know that Open Dyslexic, again, is really great for students with dyslexia. And then we also have the spacing. So all of these ways can make a very, very busy text that could be really overwhelming for somebody just learning the language, a little easier to look at and engage with. So any questions about Simplify? While we're here, another support that could help your learners, again, with like chunking and just focusing on what they're looking at, or even tracking just line by line, is the Screen Mask tool. So if you were to click Screen Mask, it has my settings saved from before. But if you came over to this cogwheel here, so I know, like, when I was in the classroom, some students would use rulers to kind of track exactly where they were at. Or again, for my ELL students, I might break passages into pieces to help them out. Oh, nice. Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad we're all learning some good stuff. So yeah, with the background, you can change the color. It's really a preference, or whatever, you know, contrast-wise helps your students. You can also change the color of this light. That is really like zeroing in on what they're reading. For the background opacity, I always recommend, if you are trying to help students avoid cognitive overload or just really focus on where they're at, make the background completely opaque. So it's literally just what they're looking at in the Screen Mask. You can decide on how opaque to make this. And then depending on the needs of your students, this light can get as narrow or as big as they need it. And this exists on a web page, on a doc, on a slideshow. I'm just showing it to you on the Simplify page. And what's kind of neat is once they hit save, like, that's going to be their Screen Mask every time. And then they can just customize it as needed with that cogwheel. So any questions about that? I know it's a lot of information, but a lot of good stuff, hopefully. So before we move on, any questions? Or okay. So we've spent a lot of time on, I would say, listening and reading. So I do want to show you a few tools for speaking and writing that can help your students as well. So I am just going to go back to this page here. Okay, so I am on this Google Doc that has just a random article that I pulled. And this button down here that says practice reading aloud. So what it just did, oh, hold on one second. I had it on bathroom still. All right. Okay. So I just highlighted this because in our previous moment on this doc, I had used bathroom. So I just highlighted this passage here. And what it did is it pulled up a new tab. And this is where my students can practice reading aloud. So of course, we want them to be able to hear themselves speaking and have that practice with reading and English. So this is a really quick way to allow for them to do that. It's a very basic mechanism in that they would just come over to here, hit start recording. They can record themselves reading this out loud. They can hit stop. They can hit play then to hear what they sounded like. And then they can hit send to share it with you. I am not part of a Google Classroom, so this is not going to pull anything up. But if I were a student that was linked up to a Google Classroom, it would then send to my teacher. So I always like to point that out to the ELL, EAL folks, just because, of course, you want your students to be reading as well as listening. So that's a really neat tool just built right in. So any questions about the read aloud? Oh, nice. Awesome. Yeah. And there's a few more up my sleeve, so love to hear it. All right. So for speaking and expressing their thoughts, we do have a few tools to help them with that. We know that writing comes last on the spectrum of, listening, speaking, reading, then writing, but there are ways to help your students get their thoughts out and express themselves. The first of which is talk and type. So at first glance, talk and type is very basic, but I do want to show you what you can use with your students as well. So first glance, talk and type is exactly what it sounds. I will talk and it will type. We do use Google's software for this, so we like to think it's kind of top of the line. But of course, with articulation and mispronunciations, it may not type exactly what your students meant or what they said. And that's just kind of like what happens with this at times. I really recommend giving them a headset with a mic at the very least, and making sure that they're not in a very loud classroom where it might pick up on a lot of background noise. But again, classrooms are noisy places. So we like to think that this is sort of the best of the best. But of course, there will be times where it types out things that your students did not mean, especially as they're learning the English words. But it works exactly as you would think, in that you hit the button, I am speaking, and talk and type is typing, period. So that's like the most basic sort of application, right? But if you notice, when I stopped recording, now I have an option. I have a drop-down menu. And if I come over here, depending on what language your student is fluent in, they can actually pick it so that as they speak in it, talk and type can actually be typing in that language. And then you could use the Google Translate hack to then translate it into English. Yeah, for sure. So when you click it, it just automatically turns on the mic and it's like, yeah, talk. You're talking in English, right? So talk, right? But if instead I did this and just paused it, I can then change it to whatever language I need it to be acknowledging as I'm talking, and then I can hit record. So I do just want to point that out. Your students can talk in their native language using talk and type. So any questions about that? All right. I know this has been a lot of information. We have about 10 more minutes, so I'm just going to squeeze in a few more tools. And then, like I said, I am going to send a bunch of resources over to be shared out with you all as well. But the next thing that you are just going to love is prediction. So if you hit this crystal ball, oh, you know what? Let's go back to settings really quick. So under speech, you're going to see prediction. So what is going to happen with prediction is basically it's going to give your students a nudge to words that they may want to be using. We know that these students in particular are very hesitant writers because they're a little unsure, they're unsteady, right, with the language. So giving them this nudge is a beautiful thing. So I highly recommend to give them the listening part of this, that you come to the settings and check off read prediction suggestions on hover. If the students do not know the words, but they may know them by hearing them, this is going to be extremely important to be checked off. So I am going to hit this crystal ball here. And what you'll notice, let me scroll down so you can see it a little better, is that right off the bat, it has given me some pretty standard sentence starters. So it's like, maybe you want to start your sentence with the, be, and, right? Like those are pretty typical sentence starters. And if your students aren't sure what those words are, they can just, since I check that off in settings, I can hover.
The, be, to, of.
So I can hear the
The.
words that it is suggesting to me. And if I like the word or I want to use it, I can do this in a couple of ways. First of which, I could just type it, of course. I can click it, and it will appear in my doc. And I also, if you notice, there are numbers next to each word. I could use Control and then hit the number. So I am hitting Control 4, and that puts only into my doc for me. And I don't have to use the words being suggested by prediction. I just want to point that out. Like they're not going to run into a roadblock if they aren't using one of the suggested ones, but it is there to show students words that could make sense in the context of their writing to come next, and give them the gentle nudge. And another thing that is really cool, I'm going to just kind of go rogue here and not use any of the words suggested. The online class, I enjoy it. If your students, of course, they're going to be phonetic spellers. They're trying their best to sound out and type words that they've maybe have not necessarily seen in writing before. If this is a high school student and they really like physics class, they may try their best to sound it out by saying physics. And this tool is intelligent enough and responsive enough to go, oh, I think you meant physics. And your students can hover
physics
and go, oh yeah, that's what I always hear my teacher say this class is. It's that word.
Physics.
And they can click it and it will actually replace their misspelled word and put it right into their writing. So a really nice support tool for your students as they hit that point of being able to write in English. So any questions or concerns about that? All right, I'm going to show you one more tool. And then I'm going to show you basically like a treasure trove of resources. I will drop a few in the chat, but like I said, I will send them over as well. So the last tool that is going to be great for you and also for your students is voice notes. So we saw how talk and type is going to turn what they are basically dictating into writing. It's like a built-in scribe for them. But not every activity requires your students to like have it written out, right? Like at its basis, if they can speak it, like we'll accept that, right? It's just that you can't be like everywhere at once, writing down everything your students are saying or listening. So a great tool is voice notes. So if this were, let's say like, actually, I think I have, yeah. So if you had, I know when I was in the classroom, when I would tell my students to explain how they got an answer, they'd be like they hated writing it out. But like if I were one-to-one with them, they'd be like, okay, so first I did this. If that's the case, then it's not a written assignment that you need to grade. They could just use a voice note. So here where it says explain how you got your answer, your students could just highlight this like, all right, yeah, I will. And they can come up to voice note and they are able to record for up to 1 minute. And it will embed right within their assignment where you ask them to do something, but it will embed as an audio file. So your students could say, you know, first I brought the 4 over and added it, and then I found that x equals 4, you know, like whatever. And then they can listen back. So they would hit the play button. If they don't like it, if they want to try it again, they could hit record. And whenever they're ready, they can just hit the comment button. It's going to take a second to work its magic and embed over here. Or it should be. I wonder if we have a little bug today. Let me try that one more time. All right, so we are recording. Hit comment. Oh, there it is. Okay, took a second. So yeah, so now I have that audio file off to the side, and myself as a teacher, I could click into their assignment, hit play, and listen. You as a teacher ahead of time can also do this on an assignment if you want to give them more verbal cues to get through it, or like show them how to pronounce a word. You can embed as many voice notes as you want. There's no limit. So like you could literally mark up an entire article with voice notes and prompt your students as they're getting through it with your voice. Also, just a hack in general, a teacher hack in general, it's a great way to give feedback instead of having to handwrite or type it. Just give that verbal feedback and embed it into an assignment. You can also embed these into Google Slides as well. So I know that some students might want to use this as like a presentation tool, like just embed their voice ahead of time and hit play when it's time to present. So voice notes really have like multiple uses that for teachers and students alike. So any questions about any of those tools? It was a lot, I know. So anything more that we can sort of chat about, or are we in good shape? All right, well, it's the top of the hour, so that's awesome, Tina. I'm glad that you are walking away with ideas. That's the goal here. So academy.texthelp.com is going to speak to you. It is full of a bunch of resources, but instead of you having to sort of dig in on your own, I'm going to drop a quick link here. And I'm going to send a lot more links to Whiteley and Julia to forward along. But this is your page on academy.texthelp.com because there is so much there. These are all of our resources for English language learners. So you are going to find like lesson plans. You're going to find printouts that will sort of remind you of how the tools can help with each step of language acquisition. There's so much there. So I will be sure to send over some of my favorites, as well as, of course, this recording. But if you're ever like in a bind and don't know how read and write can help your learners, I would definitely pop onto the Academy. And that is all I have.